Emily Clarke pulled up to the old brick building on Ashford Street, gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The rain had begun to fall in a steady rhythm, the windshield wipers cutting through the silence with a monotonous thud. In the back seat, her 7-year-old daughter Lily kicked her feet idly, humming a tune that Emily didn't recognize. "This is it, Lily, our new home." Emily tried to keep her voice upbeat, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Lily's wide green eyes peered out the window, her reflection merging with the shadowy outline of the apartment building. "It looks old," she said cautiously. Emily forced a smile, glancing up at the worn stone facade with its iron-railed balconies and tall, narrow windows. "Old can be good. It has character, and it's just the right size for us." That much was true. After her messy divorce, Emily didn't have the luxury of being picky. The apartment was affordable, a rare gem in the city's overinflated market. It was a chance for her and Lily to start over, a clean slate. At least, that's what she told herself. The moment they stepped inside, Emily felt it. The air was cool, heavier than she had expected. The narrow hallway was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb, casting long shadows across the scuffed wooden floor. There was a musty smell, as if the building had been holding its breath for years. Lily's tiny hand slipped into Emily's as they approached the apartment door on the second floor. Emily fumbled with the key, her heart racing for reasons she couldn't explain. The lock clicked open, and they stepped inside. The apartment was modest. 2 small bedrooms, a living room, and a kitchen that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. But it was clean, and it was theirs. Boxes cluttered the space, waiting to be unpacked, but Emily was too exhausted to deal with them now. "This will be your room," Emily said, leading Lily down the hall to the second bedroom. The space was small, with a single window that faced the courtyard. It was quiet, peaceful even, but Lily hesitated at the door. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Someone's been here." Emily blinked, glancing around the empty room. The curtains hung limp, the air still. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Lily shrugged, her gaze fixed on the window. "I just feel it." Emily knelt down to her daughter's level, brushing a strand of dark hair from Lily's face. "It's just a new place, honey. Sometimes new places feel different, but there's no one here but us." Lily didn't respond. Her eyes stayed locked on the window, her small shoulders stiffening as if she sensed something that Emily couldn't. Emily's chest tightened, but she forced herself to brush it off. They were both just adjusting, she reasoned. It would pass. That night, after they had eaten takeout on the living room floor, Emily tucked Lily into her new bed. The little girl seemed more settled, her earlier tension melting away as sleep crept in. Emily kissed her forehead, murmuring goodnight before heading to her own room. The apartment was silent, save for the occasional creak of the old pipes and the steady hum of the refrigerator. Emily lay in bed, her thoughts drifting, when the sound of soft footsteps echoed through the hall. She froze, her heart hammering in her chest. It was probably Lily, she told herself. She must have gotten up for water. Emily listened for a moment, waiting to hear her daughter's voice, but the footsteps stopped abruptly. Swallowing her unease, Emily climbed out of bed and padded down the hall toward Lily's room. The door was ajar, the dim glow of the nightlight spilling out into the hallway. Emily peered inside, her breath catching in her throat. Lily was sound asleep, her small body curled under the covers. She hadn't moved. Emily stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet, willing herself to believe it had been her imagination. After a few moments, she returned to her own room, trying to shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. The next morning, Emily woke to Lily sitting cross-legged at the foot of her bed, her eyes wide and serious. "Mommy, the lady was in my room last night." Emily blinked the sleep from her eyes. "What lady, sweetie?" "The lady by the window," Lily said matter-of-factly. "She was standing there, watching me." Emily sat up, a chill crawling up her spine. She tried to keep her voice steady even though her heart was pounding. "It was just a dream, Lily. You're still getting used to the new place." But Lily shook her head. "It wasn't a dream. She was there." Emily stared at her daughter, trying to think of a comforting response, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she pulled Lily into a hug, holding her tightly. That was the first night. The first time Lily spoke of the lady by the window. Emily wanted to believe it was just a child's imagination, stirred by the unfamiliar surroundings and the changes in their lives. But deep down, a seed of dread had already been planted, taking root in the corners of her mind. As the days passed, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the apartment wasn't entirely theirs, that it was waiting, watching, just as Lily had said. But for now, she convinced herself it was all in her head. After all, they had a new life to start, and surely nothing could be worse than the pain she had already endured. The days turned into weeks, and the strange occurrences at the apartment only grew more frequent. Emily did her best to ignore them, convincing herself that it was all in her imagination. She was already stretched thin, balancing a new job, unpacking boxes, and helping Lily adjust to school. The last thing she needed was to lose herself to paranoia, but it wasn't just her mind playing tricks. Lily's nighttime encounters with the mysterious woman had become routine. Each morning, her daughter would sit at the breakfast table, her eyes dark with exhaustion, and recount the same chilling details. "She was there again, Mommy," Lily would whisper, her voice flat, as if she had accepted the haunting presence. "She doesn't like when I'm in her room. She stands by the window, watching me." Emily's stomach would knot every time Lily spoke those words, but she always responded with the same reassurance. "It's just a bad dream, sweetheart. You're safe here with me." But Emily was starting to question whether she believed her own words. She had heard things too, strange, unsettling things. It started with the creaks and groans of the apartment settling, but soon they became more defined. At night, when the apartment was still and dark, she would lie awake, listening to the faintest whispers. Sometimes they were no more than a soft murmur, just out of reach, but other times they were clearer. "Get out!" Emily's heart would skip a beat every time she heard it, her skin prickling with fear. It was easy to dismiss a child's overactive imagination, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something truly was wrong with the apartment. Her nights were restless, filled with strange dreams that left her waking up in a cold sweat. She would dream of the woman, tall, gaunt, with hollow eyes, and each time she seemed to get closer. One evening, as Emily sat in the dimly lit kitchen, sorting through a stack of bills, her phone buzzed. It was her old friend Sarah, one of the few people who still kept in touch after the divorce. Relieved for a distraction, Emily answered, hoping for some much-needed normalcy. "Hey, Em, how's the new place?" Sarah's voice was bright, oblivious to the darkness swirling around Emily's mind. "It's fine," Emily replied hesitantly. She didn't want to burden Sarah with her worries. "Just busy, you know. Moving is stressful." "Yeah, I bet. I was thinking of visiting next weekend, if you're free, of course. It's been too long since we've caught up." Emily smiled faintly, the idea of a friend visiting warming her slightly. "That would be great. I could use the company." As they chatted, Emily hesitated to bring up the strange happenings in the apartment. But the words were on the tip of her tongue, and before she could stop herself, she blurted out, "Actually, there's something weird about this place." Sarah paused on the other end. "Weird how?" Emily exhaled slowly, feeling silly but also desperate for someone to validate her growing fear. "It's probably nothing, but Lily keeps talking about seeing a woman in her room, and I've been hearing strange things at night, like whispers. I don't know, maybe I'm just stressed." For a moment, Sarah said nothing, and Emily braced herself for her friend to laugh it off. But instead, Sarah's voice dropped to a more serious tone. "Emily, I didn't want to freak you out, but I've heard about that building before." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "Back in college, one of my professors told us about an old case, something that happened in your building, I think. I don't remember all the details, but there was this woman, Margaret Albright. She lived there a long time ago, and she wasn't right. They said she lost her child in an accident, and after that, she hung herself in one of the apartments." Emily's grip on the phone tightened, her throat dry. "Sarah, please tell me you're joking." "I wish I was. I don't know if it's the same apartment, but I think it might be. They said she was obsessed with the window, the very spot where her child's crib used to be. She would just stand there for hours, staring out into the courtyard, like she was waiting for something. After she died, people started saying they saw her ghost, especially around that window." Emily's vision blurred as the room spun around her. She could hear Lily's voice echoing in her mind. "She stands by the window, watching me." "Oh my God," Emily breathed, her pulse racing. "What do I do? I can't stay here if this place is haunted." "I don't know, Em. You could try looking into the history of the building, see if anyone else had similar experiences, or maybe, I don't know, talk to someone who deals with this kind of stuff. It sounds crazy, but if you're scared, you need to trust your instincts." Emily barely registered Sarah's words. Her mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything. The whispers, the footsteps, the figure by the window. Were they all connected to Margaret Albright? And if so, what did she want? That night, after hanging up with Sarah, Emily sat alone in the living room, the apartment enveloped in an unsettling silence. The air felt heavier than usual, thick with an oppressive energy. She could feel it, the way the shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should, the way the light bulbs flickered ever so slightly as if disturbed by an unseen presence. The whispers returned, louder this time, their tone insistent. "Get out! She doesn't belong here." Emily's breath hitched as she bolted upright, her heart slamming against her ribcage. The voice wasn't in her head, it was in the room. Panicked, she rushed to Lily's bedroom, her hands shaking as she flung open the door. The little girl sat upright in bed, her eyes wide with terror. "She's here, Mommy," Lily whimpered, pointing toward the window. "She's angry." Emily's eyes darted to the window, and for a fleeting moment she saw it. A shadowy figure, indistinct but unmistakable, standing just beyond the glass. Its dark outline was faint, but it lingered, as if watching, waiting. Emily grabbed Lily and pulled her close, her mind racing. She could no longer deny it. Something was haunting them. The apartment wasn't safe, and neither were they. Whatever this spirit was, it had latched onto them, and its presence was growing stronger with every passing day. But why? What did it want? And how far would it go to claim what it believed was its own? Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the apartment had come alive. It was as if every corner, every shadow had eyes. The whispers, which had once been faint murmurs in the night, now seemed to seep into her waking hours, a constant reminder that they were not alone. Days blurred into restless nights. sleep became an elusive luxury, and Emily found herself tiptoeing through the apartment, afraid of disturbing something unseen. Every creak of the floorboards, every soft groan of the old pipes felt deliberate, as though the apartment was trying to communicate with her, or worse, warn her. Lily's behavior only deepened Emily's growing sense of dread. She had become withdrawn, barely speaking during the day, her once bright personality dulled by fear. At night, Emily would hear her talking in hushed tones, her small voice carrying through the thin walls. "Who are you talking to, Lily?" Emily asked one afternoon, kneeling beside her daughter as she colored in the living room. Lily didn't look up from her drawing. "The lady," she replied calmly. Emily's stomach knotted, a familiar cold wave of fear washing over her. "What does the lady say?" "She tells me things about her little girl. She says she misses her. She says I remind her of her." Emily's breath caught in her throat. It was worse than she had imagined. Whoever or whatever this entity was, it was no longer just an apparition in the night. It had become something far more dangerous, something that had taken an interest in her daughter. Emily couldn't take it anymore. That evening, after putting Lily to bed and locking her door with the hope that it would somehow keep her safe, Emily sat at the kitchen table with her phone, scrolling through local listings for paranormal investigators. She had never believed in such things. Ghosts, hauntings, spirits. They had always seemed like stories to scare children. But now, staring down at her own child's terrified eyes every morning, she knew they needed help. After what felt like hours of scrolling through dubious websites and strange reviews, she found someone who seemed credible. Tom Michaels, a seasoned investigator with decades of experience, had been featured in several publications. His credentials weren't as important as the overwhelming number of desperate reviews from people who claimed he had helped them when no one else could. Emily hesitated for only a moment before dialing the number. Tom answered on the third ring. "Tom Michaels, paranormal investigator," a gruff voice said on the other end. "How can I help?" "Hi. Emily stammered, unsure how to begin. She glanced around the empty kitchen, half expecting the unseen visitor to be listening. "I think my apartment is haunted." There was a brief silence, followed by a deep sigh. "Tell me what's been happening." Emily poured everything out. Lily's encounters, the whispers, the strange feelings in the air, the woman by the window. She left nothing out, even the way the apartment seemed to be suffocating them, draining them both of their energy. When she finished, her hands were trembling, but Tom's calm voice steadied her. "I'll be there tomorrow afternoon," he said. "Keep your daughter close tonight. Don't leave her alone." That night was the longest of Emily's life. She stayed by Lily's bedside, listening for the whispers, watching the shadows dance on the walls. Every so often, Lily stirred, mumbling in her sleep about the lady. But there were no whispers that night, no footsteps in the hall. The air was eerily still, almost as if the apartment itself knew that help was coming. The next afternoon, Tom arrived, carrying a bulky bag of equipment. He was taller than Emily expected, with salt and pepper hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put her somewhat at ease. But the moment he stepped inside the apartment, his expression shifted. His eyes narrowed, scanning the space like a predator sizing up unseen prey. "It's cold in here," he murmured, rubbing the back of his neck. "Colder than it should be?" Emily nodded, watching as Tom unpacked his equipment. He set up several small cameras around the apartment, one in Lily's room, one in the hallway, and another by the window in the living room. Then he pulled out a strange-looking device that beeped softly as he moved it through the rooms, frowning more with each step. "There's definitely something here," he said after a long silence. "It's old, and it's angry." Emily's heart sank. She had been hoping, despite everything, that he would tell her it was all in her head, that the strange occurrences were just a combination of stress and imagination. But the look on Tom's face confirmed what she already feared. "How do we stop it?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom scratched his chin, eyes focused on the hallway where the shadows seemed to linger longer than they should. "It's not just the building that's haunted. It's fixated on your daughter." Emily's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" He looked at her, his expression grave. "Spirits like this, they latch on to what they lost. From what you've told me, this woman lost her child. She's identified Lily as a replacement. She wants her." Emily felt the room spin. The thought of losing Lily, of something taking her, was too much to bear. She clenched her fists, trying to steady herself. "Then we have to stop her. We have to get her out of here." Tom nodded. "I'm going to try something tonight. It might make her more active, so you need to be prepared." "What do you mean by more active?" Emily asked, her stomach twisting in knots. "I'm going to provoke her," he said simply. "She needs to know she can't have Lily." That night, as the sky darkened and the apartment filled with an ominous quiet, Tom prepared for the confrontation. He sat cross-legged in the middle of the living room, a series of candles flickering around him. Emily and Lily stayed close, watching as he chanted softly under his breath, his voice steady and calm. The cameras blinked quietly in the background, recording everything. For the first hour, nothing happened. The apartment remained unnervingly still, as if holding its breath. But as midnight approached, the temperature dropped sharply, and the soft whispering began again, this time louder, more insistent. "She doesn't belong here." Emily's skin prickled as the whispers grew louder, echoing off the walls. Lily huddled against her, trembling with fear, her small hands clutching Emily's tightly. The shadows in the room seemed to shift and stretch, bending toward the light. Suddenly, one of the cameras by the window flickered, its screen going black for a moment before a figure appeared, vague, shadowy, but unmistakable. It stood by the window, just as Lily had described, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, eyes empty and lifeless. Emily's heart stopped. Tom's voice grew louder, firmer, as he continued chanting, his eyes closed in concentration. The figure at the window wavered, as though resisting the pull of his words, but it did not disappear. And then, with a bone-chilling clarity, the whispers turned into a voice, louder, angrier. "She's mine." Emily's breath caught in her throat. The lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness for a brief moment before coming back on. When they did, Lily was standing by the window, her small hand outstretched toward the ghostly figure. "Mommy," Lily said, her voice distant and hollow. "She wants to take me." Terror gripped Emily as she rushed to pull Lily away from the window, her heart pounding wildly. The figure moved closer, its presence heavy and suffocating. Emily's hands shook as she held her daughter tightly, desperately trying to shield her from the unseen visitor that seemed intent on claiming her. Tom's voice boomed over the chaos, commanding the spirit to leave, but the figure only loomed larger, its dark outline pulsating with rage. The room was filled with the deafening sound of whispers and Emily's frantic heartbeat as she realized this spirit wasn't going to let go so easily. "She's mine." The apartment was deathly silent. The temperature had dropped to an icy chill, so cold that Emily's breath came in sharp, visible puffs. She held Lily tightly, her back pressed against the wall, her heart pounding in her chest. Across the room, the figure hovered near the window, a dark, amorphous shadow with hollow eyes fixated on them. "She's mine," the voice hissed again, louder this time, almost thunderous. The sound rattled Emily to her core, the words reverberating through her bones, through her mind. She could feel the weight of the spirit pressing down on her, suffocating her with its desperation, its grief. Tom's voice, though steady, was strained, barely holding against the overwhelming presence of Margaret Albright's spirit. He had drawn a protective circle of salt around them, chanting in low, rhythmic tones. But even that was beginning to falter. The spirit wasn't just angry, it was relentless. Emily's grip on Lily tightened as her daughter buried her face in her chest, trembling. Lily had stopped speaking. She had stopped crying. She had fallen into a terrifying stillness, as though the spirit had already begun to drain the life from her. Emily could feel it, the pull of something ancient, something that thrived on pain, on loss. "Please," Emily begged, her voice breaking, tears streaming down her face. "Please let her go. She's just a child." The figure twitched, its head snapping unnaturally to the side, its hollow eyes narrowing. Emily felt the oppressive air shift slightly, as though the spirit was considering her plea, weighing her words. But the whispering only grew louder, more insistent, swirling around them like a storm. "She's mine! She's mine!" Tom's voice cut through the noise, his chanting more urgent now, but Emily knew in her heart that it wasn't enough. Margaret wasn't just a lost soul. She was tethered to this place, to her grief, her desperation. She had waited for so long, and now she believed she had found what had been stolen from her. Emily's thoughts raced, panic coursing through her veins. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. She could feel Margaret's despair, her need to fill the void left by her lost child. And in that moment, Emily understood. It wasn't just about Lily. It was never just about her. Margaret had latched onto Emily, too. She had sensed Emily's brokenness from the moment they had entered the apartment, the way Emily carried her own grief, her own guilt, the divorce, the years of feeling like she had failed as a mother, as a wife. Margaret had recognized that darkness, that vulnerability, and had exploited it. Emily had been feeding the spirit's anger all along. "Margaret," Emily whispered, her voice trembling but stronger than before. The whispering stopped abruptly, the figure freezing in place, its hollow eyes turning toward her. Emily swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet the spirit's gaze. "I know why you're here. I know what you want. But you can't have her. You can't have Lily." The air grew impossibly heavy, thick with tension. Emily felt Margaret's presence draw closer, the cold pressing in on her like a vice. She could almost feel the spirit's breath against her skin, icy and bitter, as it loomed just inches from her face. "I'm sorry," Emily continued, tears blurring her vision. "I'm sorry you lost your daughter. I'm sorry for what happened to you, but you can't take my child to fill that void. I know you're hurting, but this has to end." Margaret's form seemed to flicker, the edges of her shadowy figure unraveling slightly. For a brief moment, the room was silent, still. Then the figure shifted again, this time closer, its empty eyes filled with something new, something almost human. "You don't understand." The voice was different now, softer, filled with sorrow. Emily could feel it, Margaret's overwhelming pain, her deep, festering grief. The air around them seemed to throb with it. "I do understand. Emily said, her voice breaking. "I know what it's like to feel like you've lost everything, to feel like you've failed the people you love. But taking my daughter won't bring yours back. It won't end your pain." For a long, agonizing moment, the figure stood frozen. Emily held her breath, her heart pounding so loud it drowned out the silence. Margaret's form wavered again, flickering in and out of focus, as if she was torn between staying and leaving, between her anger and her grief. "You lost your child," Emily said softly, stepping toward the shadow. "But I won't lose mine. You need to let her go." The room pulsed with an intense, almost unbearable pressure. Emily felt it all at once: Margaret's agony, her desperation, her longing for the child she had lost. The spirit trembled, its shadowy figure collapsing inward on itself, shrinking. And then, just as suddenly, the air lightened. The cold began to lift. The whispers faded into silence. Margaret's figure dissolved, unraveling into the darkness like a wisp of smoke. There was no dramatic exorcism, no violent outburst, just a quiet, heartbreaking release. The presence that had haunted them for so long was gone. Emily collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, her body shaking with exhaustion and relief. She pulled Lily close, holding her daughter against her chest as the warmth slowly returned to the apartment. Tom let out a deep breath, lowering his hands. "It's over," he said quietly, wiping the sweat from his brow. "She's gone." Emily nodded, unable to speak, her heart still racing. She looked down at Lily, who was staring up at her, wide-eyed and quiet. "Is she really gone, Mommy?" Lily asked, her voice small and fragile. Emily stroked her daughter's hair, nodding through her tears. "Yes, sweetheart. She's gone." But as Emily sat there, holding her child in the dim light of the living room, she couldn't shake the feeling that the true ghost had never been Margaret. The haunting had always been about more than just a spirit clinging to the past. It had been about Emily's own demons, her guilt, her pain, the part of her that had felt like a failure as a mother, as a person. Margaret's ghost had simply mirrored that darkness, magnified it until it threatened to consume them all. As they stood to leave, packing up their few belongings and walking out of the apartment for the last time, Emily cast one final glance at the window, the place where the spirit had stood for so many nights. The glass reflected only her own weary face now, tired but determined. And in that reflection, she saw something else, something stronger. She had faced the darkest part of herself and survived. For the first time in what felt like years, Emily felt the faint stirrings of hope. Lily took her hand as they stepped into the cool night air, and together they left the haunted apartment behind. The ghost was gone, but the scars it left behind would linger, faint but ever present, reminders of the battle they had fought, not just with Margaret Albright, but with the ghosts they carried inside themselves. As they walked away, Emily knew that the past would never be truly gone, but now, at least, they had the chance to move forward. And for the first time in years, that was enough.